There you go. Got it. It's recording now.
Hello, this is Joseph Horn with Empower Fort Worth, Empower Texas, and I have as a guest with me Billy Mitchell, who's a retired Fort Worth police officer, worked for the department for 30 years, and is also the head of at that time, the department's peer support coordinator department. And I believe you retired in 2021. You were also a certified instructor in critical incident stress management through the University of Maryland. You are also a coordinator for the Dallas-Fort Worth First Responders Critical Incident Stress Management Network, which serves as the resource of cooperation and mutual aid for critical incidents that occur. And you also consult and provide instruction on critical incident stress management to police agencies and national peer support groups throughout the United States. So thank you very much, Billy, for joining us. One of the first questions we have is, why did you become a police officer? And did it become what you thought it was going to be?
Well, thanks, Joseph. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm an Air Force brat. My dad was in the Air Force. Both of my older brothers got in the Air Force, so I'm used to a military style, workforce. I had always considered being a police officer, but I never really took it seriously. One day, Fort Worth PD was hiring, and there's a full page ad, and I decided to apply, and praise God, I made it in the first try.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your public service. What is critical incident stress management?
Okay, I'm sorry.
That you do. What is critical incident stress management?
Critical incident stress management is a multi-component system designed to help individuals and groups that are in crisis. It's a multi-component system, as in not one size fits all. We don't do critical incident stress debriefings for everybody. We don't do crisis management briefings. Most of what we do are one-on-ones to help individuals who've dealt with a traumatic event. And what makes it traumatic? The individual. While you may witness an accident, a horrific accident, and it doesn't affect you, the next person right next to you may be affected by it, and it doesn't have to do with personal weakness. It's just the way the body responds to certain traumas.
So a police officer can experience that, but also the people at that scene involved in that incident can also experience that as well. Is that correct?
Yes. Individuals who are directly involved in the traumatic event. As a matter of fact, I sort of call it like if you look at a target, there's a center, and then there's concentric rings around that center. Those who are closest to the traumatic event, whether physical or emotionally close, they have a higher likelihood of being affected by the traumatic event.
And does an incident have to be one thing that happens in time, or can it be something that happens over time?
Well, there's such a thing as cumulative post-traumatic stress disorder. And so those are the small little, bee stings that occur over the life of an individual that can add up. And eventually one of those is the straw that broke the camel's back. It could be a one-time event, like seeing something horrific, or it could be a situation in which, for example, a life-changing event like a divorce that can be considered a traumatic event.
It was interesting about the critical incident stress management. It seems to me to be something that really the community at large could benefit from. We have recent studies that indicate that 26% of Americans are taking mental health medication. That's a huge number. And that affects children. 1 out of 8 high school kids attempt suicide. Doctors have the highest suicide rate of any profession. First responders live 22 years less than the average population. And then we go to other people. It has broad economic cost in our country in terms of healthcare, shorter longevity in America, as well as absenteeism, and it goes on. Why are we not doing this at a larger scale? Shouldn't everybody in the community be taking this sort of training?
Well, stress management training is good for anyone, whether it's a toddler or someone who's aged. Stress management training is good for anyone. For example, I was reading a book by Lieutenant Colonel retired Dave Grossman called On Killing. And this is about the physiological and psychological effects of killing in peace, like as a peace officer, or war as a soldier. And in that book, I read this part that was talking about tactical breathing, how you can actually lower your heart rate and give you a feeling of calm by doing relaxation breathing. I'd never done it before. And I was going through a divorce at the time, and I was dealing with a lot of anxiety. I decided to try that tactical breathing. And that right there, from a stress management standpoint, boy, that made a huge difference in my life. So stress management is for everybody, but critical incident stress management training is different. That's for individuals who want to help other individuals deal with a traumatic event. A lot of people will join what's called a CERT team or something like that, which is a civilian response team for disasters. And that's one way you can help. However, most of those CERT teams don't have critical incident stress management training. But there are usually critical incident stress management programs in certain cities. And the more people that are trained in that, the better the response. Now, critical incident stress management is actually recognized by the United Nations. It's recognized by OSHA, FEMA. It's literally used all over the world.
And critical incident stress management is not just dealing with stress, but it's building resilience to deal with the everyday micro stresses that come out, that we experience. Children are expressing in high school, if there is a shooting which occurred recently in Arlington, yes, you can send a team out to that high school, but what about the kids in other high schools? Do they feel stressed because of what happened? And how does that impact them? And certainly they could benefit, I think, from such training. As an attorney, we deal with stress. We deal with bringing or experiencing other people's trauma, just as I'm sure the first responders as well, physicians, spiritual leaders, and others. When we have all of that occurring in our society, the stress, and then we look to see what's happened with the police department. And here the police department is the group that's entrusted by the community to help bring peace and order. And yet there seems to be a rift between the communities and the police departments. What is the cause of that rift?
Well, one of the causes is perception, and the other cause is reality. Okay. Perception is that the perception with certain people is that police officers are indiscriminately killing people of color. The reality is that that's not so much the case. As a matter of fact, if you look at statistically speaking, in fact, if you look at about any study, it'll show that that's not the case. However, another perception, which is based upon reality, is that for a long time, police departments were racist. Okay, look, I spent 30 years as a Fort Worth police officer, and I saw very, very, very little of that. However, you talk to the officers who came before me, and I'm not going to name them by name, but I have some in mind that told the Black officers that told me how much more racist the police department was in the 70s and in the 60s. How even the police department as a whole in general would not support Black officers that were being abused by white civilians. That sort of thing happened. And if they were treating police officers like that, what do you think about the general public? Look, I know people that were in the Black Panther Party. And in particular, One of those individuals, who I'm very, very close to, family member, he grew up in East Oakland in the 60s, and police departments were absolutely abhorrent towards Black people. They would beat them up for very, very minor offenses. And it got to the point at which, yeah, that's situations like the Black Panthers formed in order to try and bring some civility and some order to what was chaos. And fortunately, some of that stuff was positive and with the end result. So there are situations that were real, in which police departments were treating people, minorities, disproportionately, basically. So that actually happened. Now, does it happen now? Well, yes, it does still happen, but it's very, 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 very limited. I mean, are there racist doctors? Yes. Are there racist teachers? Yes. Are there racist police officers? Yes. Are there racist lawyers? Yes. Look, there are bad apples in every profession, and nobody likes to be a victim of that, especially when a person has the ability to take away their rights and their freedoms, like a police officer.
It's an interesting statement there about the background and our history and how we have in our society evolved, and we're still evolving. Because I've talked with older people of color who say that if they get pulled over by a police officer, their first thought is, are they going to get shot? And that is certainly not the perspective that I found with a lot of white people who think that, gee, if they're going to get pulled over, their insurance might go up, the car insurance. That's a different perspective. And maybe the experiences that we had growing up still impact and shade how we look and view the departments and people today. We are molded by our experiences.
Yeah, we're molded by our experiences, but we're also molded by media. We're molded by things that we see. That's why it's important that you keep your children away from pornography. That's why you keep your children away from violent video games and violent movies, because you are, even though you didn't engage in it, you were still exposed to it. And the perception that you're going to get shot, I personally don't know anyone. And I've got a lot of Black friends. I've got a lot of white friends. I got a lot of Black friends. I got Latino friends. And I don't know anybody who's afraid that, oh, police officers pulled me over, I'm going to get shot. Not to say that those people don't exist, but it's, again, a blurred perception of reality.
What do you think can help repair the rift between the community and the police departments?
Well, one of the things is, if the media would give a fair assessment of what's actually going on out there, rather than sensationalizing everything. I was speaking to you earlier, and I talked about, for example, I spent 12 years as a school resource officer, and a friend of mine, a police officer, Eddie Perez, and I were working a volleyball game. It was Poly versus Arlington Heights. Now, we noticed that Arlington Heights, all those volleyball players had matching uniforms, matching shoes. They looked great, but some of the Poly players were literally wearing slippers or whatever tennis shoes they can get, or running shoes or whatever. And we noticed these kids were sliding around. There was no way it was going to be a fair situation. So Eddie contacted the Latino Police Officers Association, and the next week, the Latino Police Officers Association provided matching shoes for every team member, so that they had that advantage. They all had matching socks and matching shoes, and they already had the uniform. So boom, that's one of the things that We did, and that didn't make the news because the LPOA, the Latino Police Officers Association, wasn't trying to advertise that we're doing. Look what good we're doing. Look at us. Look at us. No, they weren't doing that. But the thing is, it made an impact in those girls' lives and their families' lives. The Black Police Officers Association, for example, they regularly buy backpacks and buy shoes for kids, along the east side of Fort Worth that might not have that opportunity otherwise. So again, police departments are doing a lot of good. Now, I can speak about our department. I say our department because I still consider myself part of the department. I'm the consultant for the peer support team, and I'm still very active. But the thing is, I think that if the media wanted to, they could report more positively on the positive things that we do, because we know for fact they're going to report on anything negative that occurs. And if all you see is negative, then why would you think otherwise? Why would you think that there's any good?
Well, it's very interesting you said about the bias of the news media. I read through certain reports, almost a week doesn't go by where a police officer is not ambushed, sitting in a car having lunch, and somebody comes from behind and shoots. You don't hear about that in the national news. And the number of officers who do the right thing, who make those right decisions, it's a lot of high expectations of perfection when you are dealing with life and death situations that occur, that require split-second decisions. And yes, when all those good things occur, when the right decisions are made, when the officers act bravely and sacrifice themselves, but you don't hear about that. All you hear about are the few bad apples. That must really be demoralizing for you and some of the colleagues.
Well, anytime that we see, I see that our badge and patch go on TV, and the news media says, well, there's another officer has been found, driving under the influence, or did this bad thing, or did that bad thing. It reflects upon me and the badge that I carried. I'm sure if you find out that a lawyer did something unscrupulous and it makes the news, that affects you. We know about teachers that have sexually abused children. We know that. I can tell you, I spent 12 years as a school resource officer. Yeah, it happens. Okay. But the thing is, we don't see people protesting schools because of that. We don't see people protesting hospitals because there's a bad doctor there, and it was found that this doctor was a pedophile, or this doctor did all kinds of evil things. But it happens with police departments, and again, like I said, I know we have the authority to take away a person's rights, certain rights, and the right to movement, free movement, and stuff, with handcuffs and taking them to jail if they've done something wrong. So I know that is part of the whole scenario. But the thing is, I think that unfortunately, it's you become a police officer, and you learn in the academy. It's not going to be fair. Life's not going to be fair. We're going to do some things that the general public's just not going to like. There's this talk about Dave Grossman, and he talks about this thing on sheepdogs, and wolves, and how the general public doesn't like the fact that we have to walk around with guns, doesn't like the fact that we pull them over, doesn't like the fact that we're in airports sometimes in M16s. The general public would rather the police officer, cash in his badge and gun and go back until the wolf shows up. And then the general public, those citizens, are running, hiding desperately behind that sheepdog, that police officer. And that's the reality. We consider ourselves sheepdogs. Doesn't mean that we think people are dumb sheep. No. But the thing is, most people are innocent, and most people don't want to hurt anybody. And we have the capacity, and we have to be able to fight that wolf when it comes.
Oh, it's interesting you say about the sheep and where they want police around. When I've talked with some folks in the East, Fort Worth, they want more police presence. There's kind of perception, think people in the city that they don't like the police, but no, they feel safer. They want them even more in their communities because they don't like being in areas with crime. They don't like feeling unsafe in their home. Everybody wants that. It's a basic human need to want to feel safe and secure. And moving to another topic, when you mentioned before about police being vigilant, and I assume the state of hypervigilance you always have to remain in throughout the day because you are constantly looking for threats, looking for wrongdoing is part of your job. How do you respond to community that says, oh, the police just need to take more de-escalation training? I mean, you're trained to be vigilant, and when you find someone who has broken the law, they're most likely going to be in a hypervigilant state. So you have two people in hypervigilant states, and then be in that state to be able to de-escalate. As an attorney, my role is to bring people in a conflict to the table and de-escalate them so they'll listen to each other. But I'm not a party to that. As a police officer, you're one of those parties. That's a huge hurdle, it seems like, to overcome in reality, isn't it? How do we have realistic expectations?
When a person's in a hypervigilant state, especially a police officer, okay, and hypervigilant basically means constant readiness. Our amygdala is stimulated the whole time, okay? And the amygdala in the brain is responsible for one of the things, fight or flight, is survival. And if your amygdala is stimulated the whole time, and why are we in a hypervigilant state? Because there are real threats. One of the things you mentioned a little while ago are police being ambushed. And look, do you think that we've seen all those videos? Of course we have. We've seen all those videos of police being ambushed, police getting shot, police pulling over somebody and getting shot, police sitting in a restaurant and people start shooting at them. We've seen all that stuff. So we are at a constant readiness for our own safety. And also we're looking out for our citizens. We are constantly looking around for something bad that might happen. I mean, generally speaking, we're not looking for people doing good things, okay? We don't have roses in our cars and we just, hey, that's really good what you did, here's a rose. No, we are looking for the bad part of society because we want to protect the citizens from those nefarious forces. With that being said, it keeps us at a constant readiness, that stimulated amygdala, and that has an effect of wearing a person out and making them a little bit more irritated, more irritable, because they are constantly looking for threats to themselves and the general public. So that's one of the problems that we have in being police officers. However, with proper training, a lot of that can be alleviated. Okay, and proper training means, well, education about physical fitness, nutrition, and also you talk about de-escalation. The more, for example, anybody would be nervous to get in a ring with a rated boxer. Okay, you're going to be nervous, and anybody is. How do you get that nervousness out of you? Well, you train, you practice, you get yourself ready so that when you get in that situation, you're less likely to overreact. That's what training's about. And that's why when people talk about defunding the police, the first thing they cut is training. So we want as much funding as we can so that those officers receive the training that they need. Also, peer support teams. That's one of those things that can be cut also. And these peer support teams, critical incident stress management teams, are there as a safety net to a point. You can't catch everybody, but as a safety net to help alleviate the harmful effects of stress and catch people before they become stress casualties. Basically, helping to prevent a person from spilling over, their emotions spilling over and causing an incident.
Billy, thank you very much for that. And you mentioned a couple of things I want to follow up on. Training. As I'm aware of, a lot of departments apply for grants to fund training. It's not part of a regular budget that comes through. Are the cities, and of course, you still have a relation with Fort Worth, but in your experience as a national trainer and consultant, do you believe the departments are giving enough emphasis to training for the officers in this area?
Well, in light of, like I said, I mentioned earlier about George Floyd, departments decided that they wanted to have something in place to keep their officers from overreacting, keep the stress from coming to a point at which they're overreacting. So a lot of departments, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm a consultant for Responder Health, and a lot of departments are hiring organizations and training their own people in peer support, so that as a safety net, again, another layer of protection, of safety for their officers, so that they're less likely to become stress casualties. Look, the main thing is catching the incident or the traumatic event at the beginning, okay, nipping it in the bud. Having an officer there in the proximity of the person who is having a traumatic event, helping them immediately, and letting them know effective coping mechanisms to use in order to alleviate the harmful effects of that stress.
And I assume that part of the harmful effects of the stress is compassion fatigue, or is a moral fatigue. When you experience those micro challenges and micro traumas each and every day over time, the people that you join the force to help, as an attorney, the people we became licensed law practice to help, the doctors that came physicians in order to heal, over time, you lose that compassion, and it impacts you. Like you said, it affects the chemistry of your mind. And unless we are able to develop resiliency skills, our outlook on life changes, and it impacts not only how we interact with other people, but how long we're going to live, quite frankly, what our health is going to be. That they say it's a fair statement?
Well, yeah, I'd say it's a fair statement. About 15 years ago, Mr. Sean Riley, who was the director of Responder Health, it was back when he was the director of Safe Call Now, said that in general, your brain will organically and chemically change due to things that you see as a first responder. Within the first 3 years of your career, it'll organically and chemically change within the first 3 years of being a first responder. There are definite changes in the way you think, the way you see life, and compassion fatigue it can be the end result of a person not dealing with their emotions properly. Because again, when you're working with crimes against children, for example, and you're seeing the depravity of man, these monsters who hurt little children, and then you're seeing the crime scene photos, and you're looking at the videos, the interviews of the children that were, that were targeted, preyed upon by these evil people, and then there's only so much you can do, and it's got to take a course of time to do this, to do this, to do this. Boy, that is very, very traumatizing. Plus the fact that you have officers in the general public who are trying their best, who are spending their own money on groceries for people that are having issues. Officers who are spending their own money out of their own pocket, buying shoes for kids and belts as they see people along the side of the road giving away their own stuff because of compassion. Those are the kind of officers you want. Those are the kind of people you want in community. But the thing is, again, these are the unseen people. And as a result of all these things, though, if you don't deal with your stress properly, yeah, you can become a stress casualty, and compassion fatigue is just one of those possible outcomes, much less post-traumatic stress disorder or other anxiety disorders.
And thank you, Billy. And you mentioned that training is a very important component, but also diet and exercise, you alluded to earlier, are important. Exercise. My understanding is almost most police officers moonlight and do extra jobs in addition to their regular shifts. Where do they have the time to de-escalate, to process all of the trauma that occurred during the day and to shift that energy? Are they able to exercise during their working hours? Is that part of the program?
Technically, no. Officers are not allowed to work out on duty. Okay. Can you work out during your lunch? Yes. Can you work out between your regular shift and part-time job? Yes, you can. And can you work out before you go to work or after you go to work? Yes and yes. But during business hours, you're generally not allowed to work out unless it's, like I said, unless you're during your break, during your lunch break. I think that it's extremely important that police departments make the effort to include some type of workout regimen in an officer's work day.
Regimen.
Yeah, that would be very, very beneficial. There are people who've been trying to get that to occur on our department. Now I'll tell you this: as long as we're not abusing anything in Fort Worth, they weren't real sticklers for that. They understood that officers are trying to work off a lot of that anxiety, that the cortisol levels, the adrenaline levels that occur as a result of that hypervigilance in and of itself, much less if we actually have to run into something. So I think that would be very beneficial. Also, one of the things we didn't talk about is mental health checks. I think it should be mandatory for every police department, for every officer in any police department, to go for at least once a year, a mandatory mental check, where they're doing it on duty, and they're allowed to speak to a mental health professional for an hour. And they could talk about anything. They could talk about strengthening their golf game if they want to. But I think more people would be more willing to talk about personal issues and get help that way. I think these departments, I think that's one thing that would be money well spent if these departments would initiate a program where officers were required to go speak with a mental health professional once a year.
Is that confidential? In other words, if I were an officer, I would probably be concerned about what I share with that counselor being reported to my managers.
No, it is confidential unless you're a danger to yourself or others, basically. I mean, and that's with anything. I mean, if you're a lawyer and your client says, "Well, as soon as I leave your office, I'm going to go and I'm going to kill that individual," you can't let that go. I mean, and it's the same thing with a mental health professional. So it is confidential up to a certain extent.
Billy, if the police officers were listening to this program right now, what would you like to say to them?
Well, one would be that I really honor the opportunity that I had to work as a Fort Worth police officer. I think I'm biased, but I've been to a lot of different departments throughout the nation, and I have seen some really great departments, and I've seen some that weren't so great. And I can tell you this: I'm very proud of the fact that I was a Fort Worth police officer, and I know that there are a lot of things that officers throughout the nation do that are unrecognized. But I'd like you to know that I, for one, appreciate what you do. And I think that there are a lot of people in the general public that do that, but they're the silent voices. Fortunately, I live in Fort Worth. I was a Fort Worth police officer, and the city of Fort Worth, the citizens by and large, were very, very, very supportive of our police departments. I can't tell you how many times I went to go pay for my meal at a restaurant and they said somebody already took care of it. That happens so often. And by the way, with that being said, when a person does that for a police officer, I don't care how much of a hard behind that police officer is, that softens that officer's heart. That really makes a difference. And I'm not advocating everybody go out and buy police officers food and stuff, but I'm just telling you the impact of that is incomparable.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your public service. We appreciate all the law enforcement and first responders who every day commit themselves and their energy and their families as well, who support them in doing their jobs and public service and helping and keeping our communities safe and healthy. And we appreciate that. And thank you very much for being with us today. And we look forward to if there is a rift in the community, healing through understanding and realizing that, hey, we're both in the same side, and all that we got to do is listen to each other. Thank you very much, Billy.
Thank you
for being with us today. Take care. This is the conclusion of our broadcast today. We have a wonderful program coming up, so stay tuned. Be with us.